What's up, Internet? You're tuned to episode 99 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined, as always, by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Stephen Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. Been a long time coming, but I feel like we finally have a little bit of resolution here today on this show for one of the biggest stories that you and I have ever covered together, as the Xbox team has won its latest battle against the FTC.
Yeah, I mean, really, it was the start of the battle, right? As we spoke about last week. But
I
I
mean,
think it's exciting. I think we kind of saw it going this way. If anyone listened to last week's show, we were kind of just like, like FTC really hasn't shown that there's a case here, especially with what PlayStation was saying. The fact that they had Jim Ryan agreeing that exclusives were not anti-competitive. It's
or
just
that like that was
It's
not
like
even like the
there's no case,
broader
right?
plan here, right? Like he didn't look at it as
Mhm.
an Xbox play; he looked at it as a mobile play, as a broader play, right? And yeah, I think everything that we were feeling there, it seems, was echoed in the actual ruling, right? So I do want to give a shout out to Tom Warren over at The Verge for all the excellent reporting that Tom's been doing on this, as well as many others. But I'm pulling specifically from Tom's work over at The Verge today to give you guys the breakdown of the nitty gritty here, right? So to kind of give you a refresh on the characters in the story at this point, right? We had Judge Jacqueline Scott Corley was the California judge who was presiding over the case. And after listening to both arguments from the FTC and Microsoft, they have decided to deny the regulator's request for that preliminary injunction. So Judge Corley released a statement on the decision that we're going to be pulling from kind of throughout this conversation, but I will read it for you real quick just to kind of give you a summary of Judge Corley's thoughts and why she felt that this was the right move. Microsoft's acquisition of Activision has been described as the largest in tech history. It deserves scrutiny. That scrutiny has paid off. Microsoft has committed in writing, in public, and in court to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation for 10 years on parity with Xbox. It made an agreement with Nintendo to bring Call of Duty to Switch, and it entered several agreements to, for the first time, bring Activision's content to several cloud gaming services. This court's responsibility in this case is narrow. It is to decide if, notwithstanding these current circumstances, the merger should be halted, perhaps even terminated, pending resolution of the FTC administrative action. For the reasons explained, the court finds the FTC has not shown a likelihood it will prevail on its claim this particular vertical merger in this specific industry may substantially lessen competition. To the contrary, the record evidence points to more consumer access to Call of Duty and other Activision content. The motion for a preliminary injunction is therefore denied. All caps. I liked that. Denied in all caps. It's very dramatic. Oh, you're muted, bud.
Oh, sorry. It would have been great if we saw her in court and it was like an Ace Attorney thing and she's like denied or like objection comes up on screen. Would have been great. That should be the thumbnail for this. It should just be denied that comes up on screen. And like Phil Spencer's just really happy about it.
Yeah, Phil Spencer's like, he's like dressed up like a prisoner, right? Like he's got handcuffs on and he's been acquitted. So, of course, obviously Xbox very happy with this news. We did get some statements from the leadership over there. Microsoft's president and vice chair Brad Smith said, "We're grateful to the court in San Francisco for this quick and thorough decision, and hope other jurisdictions will continue working towards a timely resolution. As we've demonstrated consistently throughout this process, we are committed to working creatively and collaboratively to address regulatory concerns." And we have a lot more specific language from Brad later on about some of those regulatory concerns and who he's exactly talking about, of course. But then we also got comment from Phil Spencer, who had this to say: "We're grateful to the court for swiftly deciding in our favor. The evidence showed the Activision Blizzard deal is good for the industry, and the FTC's claims about console switching, multi-game subscription services, and cloud don't reflect the realities of the gaming market. Since we first announced this deal, our commitment to bringing more games to more people on more devices has only grown. We've signed multiple agreements to make Activision Blizzard's games, Xbox first party games, and Game Pass all available to more players than they are today. We know that players around the world have been watching this case closely, and I'm proud of our efforts to expand player access and choice throughout this journey. End.
Did he put the end on
He
the
did, all
tweet
caps.
thread?
He said, and it was a tweet thread. So yeah,
That sounds like so much like a press release. Like he got some press release thing, and it just says ends at the end.
and
Usually, of press releases. If anyone's ever seen a
he
press
couldn't
release,
he couldn't do the mic drop, so he had to give you
he
the
could have
end.
had like the hand emoji and the microphone, or he could have found a GIF and like did that. I feel like that would have been really good. But that's not Phil. He also sent an internal memo around Microsoft. I don't know if you saw this one, Pete. He said after today's decision, we're turning our focus to the UK. As you may be aware, a few months ago, the UK Competition and Markets Authority recommended that the deal be prohibited. We disagree with the CMA's concerns and have challenged its decision on appeal. At the same time, however, we're also considering how the transaction might be modified to address the CMA's concerns in a way that's acceptable to the CMA. In order to prioritize work on potential options, Microsoft and Activision have agreed with the CMA that pausing the appeal now would be in the public interests, and both we and the CMA have made a joint submission to the Competition Appeal Tribunal to this effect. So it sounds like they're not going down the route that we kind of potentially alluded to multiple weeks ago now, where maybe they pull out of the UK and we have like Activision Blizzard UK, that they really want this to go through and be a full complete deal worldwide.
They still have that option if they're not able to reach a deal, which is I think is probably why this is happening, right? Because um a big part of why this even happened, right? Like the FTC uh injunction took place at all was because Microsoft was actively exploring options to close the deal uh regardless of the UK block. That was reported about a month ago by MLEX, which is another news outlet. And they were kind of talking about how Microsoft was exploring the idea of like spinning off and having like an Activision Blizzard UK or something like that. And kind of just, if the CMA is the only holdout, then that's really no skin off their nose, right? That's a um, small part of the market in the grand scheme of things, right? And when you think about, we talked about this last week, there's no way that the CMA wants that. And for that matter, Xbox doesn't want that because that's not good for them. It's more work, it's more effort, it's more money, and it's inconvenience down the road. To your point, they want it to go through fully. And I think the CMA now kind of has their hands tied because if they're the one holdout, it's going to negatively affect UK consumers and it's not going to stop any of the things that they're trying to avoid anyway.
Yeah, it would be a real shame if the deal didn't go through because of the CMA in the UK. Um, but I wonder if they just holding out because they don't want to have egg on their face. They want to feel like they've got something from this deal. The EU got something from the deal. They managed to get something that the CMA couldn't. They got contingencies in place that the CMA wasn't able to get. And I wonder if it's like a political thing relating to Brexit. Like, do we want to make it seem like the EU can get stuff done, but the UK can't? So, are they going to want to negotiate with Microsoft and try and get maybe some additional resolutions in place that don't require ongoing regulatory oversight? Because that seemed to be their concern following the EU's approval, was that the contingencies that were put in place required someone to keep an eye on it, basically.
Yeah, and I think we have statement from Microsoft now, right? That they're willing to play ball a little bit, but I don't think that the CMA is negotiating from a very strong position at this point because the long and short of it is that Xbox no longer needs them, or Microsoft, I should say, no longer needs their approval to move forward. Right. Like the biggest holdout is the FTC. And at this point, they do have other options and they've made it clear that they intend to explore them to some degree, but we'll see what that actually looks like because the clock is ticking, right? So the FTC responded to the outcome of the case. They had their spokesperson, Douglas Farrar, said, "We are disappointed in this outcome given the clear threat this merger poses to open competition in cloud gaming, subscription services, and consoles. In the coming days, we'll be announcing our next step to continue our fight to preserve competition and protect consumers." So, in terms of what their next steps actually look like and what the options are that they can play, they're really, there aren't too many.
They
Um,
got 2 things, right? They either proceed with the trial or they don't at
Yeah,
this point.
so they have to submit that decision within the next 2 days. So we're recording this right now on the 12th, right? So by the time you're listening to this, it'll be Friday, right? So they have 2 days as of this recording, by 11:59 PM Pacific time that day, to appeal the decision. But I mean, the context you can look at here, right, of the track record of this specific uh, era of the FTC administration, right? They didn't appeal the court's decision, requiring or which allowed Meta to acquire the company within. So, like, they've said that they're planning their next steps. They absolutely could, but there's been a lot of speculation that there's a non-zero chance that they abandon the case altogether at this point because the likelihood of them winning doesn't seem very good. When you get into kind of breaking down more of Judge Corley's statement and kind of why the FTC lost the case, it harkens back to what we talked about last week, where I just do not think the FTC has made a compelling argument. And a lot of the points that they've hung their hat on, she's specifically addressed and dismantled. So I'll pull into some of these, right? So uh breaking down what were the specific elements of the FTC's case, and here's each of Judge Corley's response on why she felt it wasn't a problem. So the first was the FTC could not convince. Oh, and I will say I wanted to give a shout out to Tom Phillips over at Eurogamer, who did a great write up that I pulled the breakdown of this from. The FTC could not convince Judge Corley of any likelihood that Microsoft would pull Call of Duty from PlayStation consoles after it bought Xbox. There are no internal emails, internal documents, emails, or chats contradicting Microsoft's stated intent not to make Call of Duty Xbox exclusive. Despite the completion of extensive discovery in the FTC administrative proceeding, including production of nearly 1 million documents and 30 depositions, the FTC has not identified a single document which contradicts Microsoft's publicly stated commitment to make Call of Duty available on PlayStation and Nintendo Switch. So
Do you think she read all 1 million, or was it like a find and replace job on, like, Microsoft Word? She,
I
like
I would
she, like, pulled them
imagine
all open and she was like, Command F, find exclusive Call of
I
Duty in the same document.
I would imagine they have a team of like 100 paralegals or something, 1,000 paralegals that had to read all these documents
It's
and
like,
make a
"Right, you've
report
got
on them.
100,000 documents to read tonight, so you better order in the Domino's
They had
because
5
you're not
days.
going home."
They had 5 days, you know?
You have 5 days to read 1 million, so 100,000 a night, get going.
Yeah. Well, you gotta think though too, right? Some of those are internal documents, emails, and chat. So it's like some of these chats are like, it's not that
Like
long.
1 sentence,
Yeah,
you
you're
know?
reading Slack
Some
messages
of
and
them are
stuff.
juicy emails
Yeah.
from Jim Ryan.
And that's the thing, right? We talked about this. What did this case actually find? Those in opposition of the deal were found to be lying or misrepresenting their how they felt about it versus the public facing comment of their company. The opposite was found with Xbox. It's that they're what they've said, what they claim their commitment is here seems to hold true internally, right? That's what she's found, right? Is that there's no reason to believe that they're being duplicitous at this time. Fair enough.
What my big takeaway from it was that if I'm a chief executive or an executive at one of these companies now, I'm only communicating through Snapchats so that they don't come out in a court case when discovery happens. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna send all my
You
illicit messages about how I'm gonna make Call of Duty exclusive, or I'm just gonna have the conversations in person by the water cooler. That's
you
gonna be
think
the
that
only two
Sony would
ways I
have learned
communicate.
after the Sony Pictures leaks all those years ago. You'd think that they would have learned to maybe get something that you can't have subpoenaed, but Uh, so the second point, right, was that the judge decided that while this deal may negatively harm PlayStation as a company, it would not necessarily hurt PlayStation owners or players. So, again, pulling from Judge Corley's statement, Sony opposes the merger. Its opposition is understandable. Before the merger, Sony paid Activision for exclusive marketing rights that allowed Sony to market Call of Duty on PlayStation, but restricted Xbox's ability to do the same. After the merger, the combined firm, Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, presumably will not agree to such restrictions. Before the merger, a consumer wanting to play a Call of Duty console game had to buy a PlayStation or an Xbox. After the merger, consumers can utilize the cloud to play on the device of choice, including it is intended on the Nintendo Switch.
So, see, that sounds like it's confirmation that the Switch is only getting a cloud version as well. That's the way I read that.
I would say at least right now, yeah, but also there was like that vague talk of like Nintendo's next console, and Phil talked about like how they would want to make it an experience that was on parity with what is experienced on Switch. So it's who knows, right? Like, but I think you're probably right. I mean, that makes sense to me if you're talking about like Call of Duty, right? But I could see Warzone maybe getting a Switch version
Or
or
you just be like, "Here, have Modern Warfare from the Wii. We've ported it over. Oh, now you've got Call of Duty, and we've not we've not reneged on our deal because you have actually got Call of
yeah.
Duty on here."
I mean, either way, right? Like you'd be getting it in a way you didn't before, so it's something. But then I liked this this kind of like statement she made summarizing this segment of the argument was perhaps bad for Sony, but good for Call of Duty gamers and future gamers.
And which I would agree with, and I think that's what the FTC failed to prove, that this was bad for the overall market consumer, which is what their job is to do, and they didn't. It was bad for their number 1 competitor, but good for their number 2 competitor, right? Like Nintendo
Right.
gets Call of Duty for the first time since the Wii.
Also, I don't know, like you can't block a deal because it's bad for a competitor, right? Like that's not a good enough argument. It's supposed to be that it's going to limit competition, it's going to limit creativity, it's going to harm the consumer because it
But
limits their
you
choices.
could
It
block
doesn't
it.
do any of those things.
Whereas I think if Microsoft was like, "We're buying Sony," I think you could block it to say that it's gonna
That's
harm the
different.
competition, because
Yeah,
that is gonna harm the competition
because then there
extremely,
isn't any
and
competition.
it's limiting consumer choice, whereas this does not limit consumer choice.
And again, that is to Judge Courtney's original statement that we read, that's because of the scrutiny that this went through, right? That's why they made all those deals. That's why it ended up this way. But the deal as it is now, the I think I would agree, right? Like, and I've said this before. I've added this context every time we talk about this. I don't want this to happen. I am not in favor of media consolidation. I think mergers and acquisitions like this are generally not good. That said, I don't think that with the concessions Xbox has agreed to make, you can argue that at least for the next decade, right? It's not going to have any impact on the average consumer. The consumer that currently buys and plays Call of Duty on PlayStation, their experience will not change for the next 10 years, regardless of who owns the leash at that point, right? So there's not a good argument to be made there rather than, oh, well, maybe 10 years from now when, Xbox has already made billions of dollars selling it on other platforms that then they might maybe theoretically decide to pull it and make it exclusive. That's not a great argument, right? And it's like I have that fear. I've expressed that fear. What happens when Phil's gone? What happens when Xbox has different hands at the realm or at the helm? What happens when Xbox is number one and then they start being a little bit less friendly? Those are all things that could and might happen someday, but we're talking about decades from now. And the idea that this judge is not willing to block a deal on the fact that it might maybe come back to bite PlayStation decades down the line when they're currently a dominant market leader, it makes a lot of sense to me, right? Like, I don't think, to your point, I don't think the FTC did a good job of making the case here. They raised a lot of straw man arguments, and Xbox did a good job fighting them and addressing them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in agreement with you, but it's also Activision. I want to see Bobby Kotick gone because I can't stand the man,
Sure.
and I really want them to make games that aren't Call of Duty again. And this seems like a good way for them to be able to do it
You
because
know
I
what,
don't know
Steve?
that it was viable otherwise.
I'm glad you said that. I'm gonna pull a question from the question block, and we're gonna take a little just a beat from the legal jargon talk, and we're gonna answer this question from Wakahula, who wrote in just like you can and said, "Are there any Activision Blizzard King franchises you want them to resurrect? I would love to see them resurrect StarCraft Ghost and turn it into an action adventure." So
I don't
StarCraft,
know StarCraft Ghost.
this is a game I am vaguely familiar with because I remember like watching a YouTube documentary or something. It was like a did you know gaming kind of thing like that. And it's like one of the only, if not the only console exclusive game that Blizzard ever developed. And it's a StarCraft like stealth action game.
Wow, weird. Was it made by Blizzard or Blizzard North?
Blizzard
Oh, it was
Entertainment.
cancelled.
It was canceled? Oh, yeah, no, it never came out, but I think it got shown at maybe like an E3 or something like
Yeah,
that?
it wasn't really a Blizzard game. It was apparently made by Nihilistic Software and
Yeah.
Swinging Ape Studios,
What was the I'm trying to think.
but
Oh, okay.
it was shown for PS2, GameCube, and Xbox.
Here we go. Okay, yeah, because that was the thing. It leaked in, I think, 2020, which is when, like, I think was when I became aware of it because somebody, took all those leaked files and made a, like, little short film about it or whatever. But yeah, I that's a cool one. That's a cool call out, Wakahula. I would be down to see them take franchises like that and maybe kinda do like the Warhammer 40K thing, right? Where it's like, I think a lot of the big games that you know in that universe are like the RTS stuff that like Daedalic and or whatever that team is does. But then like they have like the what are they called? Space Marines, right? That's the
Mhm.
FPS that they have coming out, or the sequel, I guess, to that coming out. And I could see that, you know. I think for me, like the answer is definitely like it's obvious and boring because I've said it a
It's
million
Tony Hawk,
times.
right?
It's Tony Hawk, it's Crash Bandicoot, it's Spyro the Dragon. Those are the ones that I want to see them bring back and not have, be uh these games that were critically commercially successful and then they get sidelined because they don't make as much as Call of Duty or because they need to bail out their, Diablo 2 resurrected remake, right? Like that was a really huge bummer for me as somebody who loved those games. So I would
It was a really, really good win for me as someone who loves Diablo 2.
yeah. I just don't know why they had to like dissolve the studio and like ruin their identity. Why you couldn't just have them take over that project, finish it, and then go back to whatever they were going to work on after that. But that's just me. So I would love to see that. I think the other ones that come to mind for me, because there aren't a ton of their franchises that speak to me a lot, but I would love to see them make like a proper new Warcraft game. I think that would be really cool.
Maybe. I mean, I think I don't think that Blizzard are massively interested in that. I think another StarCraft makes sense, but I feel like World of Warcraft really scratches that itch for them. I'd
It's
like to
not
see them explore
it's not
more
the
in the
same
Diablo
though.
universe, but I think the one we're gonna get is gonna be Hexen because Phil Spencer keeps wearing his Hexen t-shirt at these like Microsoft events. Like he's big on Hexen somehow. I don't. He's like the only person I know that's played that game. It'll be cool to see like a return to something like Guitar Hero, but I know that people are kind of tired of plastic guitars these days, so doesn't anyone really care about that.
I
But
also just
I
think that
really
that
love rhythm games.
I think that that as a game, I think struggles in the modern era because so much of like how games get shared and build community is through streaming and content, and you can't make streams about those games because of the licensed music. I think that was a big part of why like the
Yeah.
Rock Band revival didn't work.
No, you're right, but I do feel like they could probably license music. They've got the cash for it. And apparently they also own Zork. And I think a Zork game, considering Microsoft owns like 30% of OpenAI, so they own 30% of ChatGPT. a Zork game with that kind of backing, where you can really just let your imagination run wild and kind of go crazy with a text-based role play game,
That would be so wild
would be really
to
fun.
bring that back. That would be very interesting, actually. Um, there was one other one I wanted to call out. It would be the most insane choice for them ever, but they should bring back active support for Heroes of the Storm, which was Blizzard's MOBA that they stopped active development on in 2022. Bring it back, baby. Bring it back.
I
Number
expect
3
all the
MOBA.
people that worked on it don't work there anymore. They'd have to, like, start again.
Whatever. They got the money.
Yeah, sure. Oh god.
Write
I
a
mean, I
blank
don't know what's
check.
next. I don't know what's next for Blizzard. Presumably, they're working on something else. Like, I would imagine the Diablo Infinity mobile games just, like,
I mean,
printing
they
cash
have a
for
lot
them.
of stuff that's active, right? Like they're working they have that, they're gonna be actively supporting Diablo 4 for years. They're, trying to right the ship on Overwatch 2. They're still supporting World of Warcraft. They have StarCraft. It's not in active development, but that's a thing that could come back, right? Like I feel like most of their teams are kind of spoken for right now.
Mhm. Yeah, but I wonder what's next. They've gotta have something next. They gotta be working towards something. It can't just be supporting what they've got,
I mean, I don't know,
because
right? Because
otherwise
it's
you end
like
up in a position where they're just stagnant.
they had that big MMO that they were working on for like 10 years and they canceled it. So like I don't know. I don't know if they have some other big IP project that they have like cooking in the bowels of Blizzard, but I wouldn't expect it anytime soon.
Mhm. No, I'm not expecting anything anytime soon, but I wonder what you put those teams on. Maybe it's a new IP for the first time since Overwatch, because I would like to see something fresh from them.
That would be cool. So to jump back into the breakdown of Judge Corley's, kind of blow by blow of why she made the decision the way she did this time around. On the subject of cloud streaming games, right, which we've talked a lot about, that was the primary concern from the CMA, right, to block the deal. The judge was convinced by Microsoft's argument that its buyout of Activision Blizzard would lead to more choice for consumers. This argument is foreclosed by Microsoft's post FTC complaint agreements with 5 cloud streaming providers. Before the merger, there's no access to Activision's content on cloud streaming services. After the merger, several of Microsoft's cloud streaming competitors will, for the first time, have access to this content. The merger will enhance, not lessen, competition in the cloud streaming market. Again, hard to argue that,
Yeah, and
right?
this is something that we've been saying for months now, is that yes, Sony don't want it to happen because they don't really have a robust cloud streaming solution at the moment. But Microsoft offered Call of Duty and a cloud version of Call of Duty if they want it.
Well,
And
and
they
and
turned
the
down the 10-year deal, they turned down the cloud version, they turned all of that down. They were just insisting that they wanted to block this deal, that they just did not want it to happen.
and you made the point about the EU concession, right? Where like they gave an unlimited
Yeah,
license
anyone
to
can
it
have it, you know? And
forever.
if you own it on any platform, you can stream it on any platform. It's there, it's yours. You can do what you want. It's Call of Duty. I mean, I don't think they care. They're going to be making cash off you from microtransactions anyway.
Exactly. So, and then kind of the summation was that statement I read up at the top, right? Which is that by and large, of course, this is the biggest acquisition of its kind in history. It deserved a lot of scrutiny. That scrutiny has benefited consumers, but it doesn't seem like there's an argument to be made that it limits competition. And that's what the FTC was supposed to prove. And I don't think they have.
Yeah, I agree with the judge 100%. We said this last week that everything that was presented, Microsoft's lawyers were able to shoot it down. And I don't think, if anything, I think Jim Ryan helped this case go through
I agree.
than managing to block it.
Yeah, the more involved he got, the worse it was.
Yeah.
I
He
think
should have just shut
earlier
his
on it
mouth.
made sense, but this was particular. Like PlayStation's entire role in this was proving Xbox's point.
Mhm. Yeah, it was proving that we're the top dog and we don't want this to happen. And as Judge Corley said, it's bad for Sony, so of course they're gonna wanna block it.
So then obviously, right, like we said, we still have the CMA of it all, right? Where we're currently waiting to see if the Competition Appeal Tribunal will approve the pause. But it kind of seems like at this point that the last holdout is just coming to terms with whatever, concessions the CMA needs to feel like they had their ego fed, I think, right? Where they feel like they got a win in and they can feel like, okay, now it's fine, right? Even though it will probably not be a significant change. I think that's it, right? It's that or they go the other route and they spin off a UK sub brand and the folks in the UK unfortunately don't benefit from any of this stuff. But at that point, aside from that,
I don't know if anyone if that's gonna be the case though, because like they can still put it on Game Pass and just pay like a license fee from the UK subsidiary to Microsoft, you know? Like there's no
yep.
reason that it couldn't end up on Game Pass. It's just gonna be a weird system and changing of money in a complicated, annoying, roundabout way that it's gonna just be irritating for everyone. And I don't know that the CMA bothers anymore. And like I know they've put out a statement.
Go for it.
So they said we stand ready to consider any proposals from Microsoft to restructure the transaction in a way that would address the concerns set out in our final report. And those concerns were basically that the concessions that they'd given would require ongoing regulatory oversight, that it would squash any competition for cloud, this, that, and the other. Because they were saying that they wanted to buy it to bolster their cloud streaming service, of which they're basically the number one. There is nothing else. In order to be able to prioritize work on these proposals, Microsoft and Activision have agreed with the CMA that a stay of litigation in the UK would be in the public interest, and all parties have made a joint submission to the Competition Appeal Tribunal to this effect.
And again, if that goes through, they're able to reach an agreement at that time. Microsoft will seemingly, theoretically anyway, be able to close the deal by that July 18th date that's been hanging over their head.
I mean, that's 6 days. So I don't know that they do it in 6 days from now. And that's,
Oh, I'm confident that's what they're gonna do.
yeah, they'll be working around the clock. And then I think
Yeah.
Phil's going to be jetting off on a holiday. You know how there's that Elon Jet account? There's got to be like a Microsoft jet or a Phil Spencer jet. Like if we see him getting a flight to the Bahamas on like July 17th, then we know that everything's okay and the
It
deal's
went
going
through.
through. Yeah. If he's getting a flight to London, then
Please.
maybe not so
You know
hot.
what happened last week when the last deal went through, he was already sending a thing about how they should be buying Sega. If this goes through, he's already back to work. He's like, "All right, gang, let's do it. We gotta go."
Yeah, that's when he gets announced as the Microsoft CEO and Sarah Bond becomes CEO of Xbox and Satya Nadella moves on, retires. I think that's
No,
the
I don't think it's
honestly,
happening.
I think that's the next play.
I don't think so. I don't think Phil wants that. I think Phil's a
Phil
gamer.
doesn't want to be CEO of the second biggest company in the
No,
world.
I don't think so. I think what he wants his legacy to be is that he's the guy that made Xbox permanent.
A thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
think I
killed
think
TV.
yeah,
Dead.
genuinely. I think that's what he cares about. I don't think he like and obviously he's a
He might want to flog Microsoft Office again. He was back over in the Microsoft camp before. He might want to be back
maybe.
there making Clippy more intelligent with AI.
Oh my god, that would be something else. So, the kind of last statement I wanted to pull in here from the folks involved, right, is it's very similar to the one we heard from Phil up above. It's from Brad, again, Microsoft's president. After today's court decision in the U.S., our focus now turns back to the U.K. While we ultimately disagree with the CMA's concerns, we are considering how the transaction might be modified in order to address those concerns in a way that is acceptable to the CMA. In order to prioritize work on these proposals, Microsoft and Activision have agreed with the CMA. Yeah, and it's the same thing, right? We get that same kind of just like this is what we think we got to do. So they're back at the table. They're negotiating. And the idea that they can't come to an agreement in a week, nah, that's definitely the point, right? Because otherwise, why have the stay? The thing was supposed to go to court in a couple of weeks. It was going to be what on the 28th, I think. So like I think it's very clear that all parties are ready to come to the table. They're ready to play ball, and unless the FTC is willing to push to the next phase, I think this is done.
Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with you. I wonder then at what point the deal closes, at what point we start to see things happen, right? Because with the Bethesda deal, it took about a year for everything to kind of start coming through on Game Pass and
Not
seeing some
totally
of the
though.
ends
Not
of the
totally.
exclusives.
Because when it was within, I believe it was within 3 days of the initial closing of the case was when we saw the first batch of Bethesda games come to Game Pass. And it's not
Oh,
everything,
okay.
but all the retro stuff came first. If you remember, there was that first group of like 20 games that came. Because,
Yeah, yeah, maybe you're right, but, we did have to wait a long time for some of the more current games, like
of course. And we do have some context on a few of those things. Um, I'm
there was
trying
the
to,
Blizzard boss that said Diablo 4 is not coming to the Game Pass. That was shut down this week,
yeah, for
because it was
now.
rumored. Yeah.
Yeah, for now. But what happens when they buy it? Okay, so look at this. So the deal closed on March 9th. That was when Xbox posted officially welcoming Bethesda to Team Xbox. We have a CNBC article March 9th. Microsoft closes Bethesda acquisition. So let me see. Bethesda
What do you think
games.
it's like on those days? Phil Spencer walks in, he's like, they're in the boardroom, everyone gets fired, they've all lost their job. Bobby's carrying out like a cardboard box with like the picture of his family and a suitcase full of cash out to
Phil
his like
walks in,
Porsche.
kicks Bobby on the butt on his way out the door. He's like, "All right, see you later, baby. I'm in charge." So I do just want to point out, I was actually correct on the timing. It was 3 days later on the 12th, and it was 20 games that came, and that included Doom, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, like Dishonored 2, Elder Scrolls Online, right? So it was a mix of newer games and
Ah,
classics,
okay.
but not like the newest stuff. So I
Do you
think we'll
do you
we'll
think they
probably
start
see.
pulling stuff off of other services? So,
You
like,
know what,
are
Steve?
people not gonna be able to play Toy Story 2 anymore on PlayStation?
No, I don't think so. I think they want that money, right? Maybe it also comes to Game Pass, but
It can't come to Game Pass, it was a PS1 game, unless they're gonna build a PS1 emulator.
whatever. They could do it. Just change the
I don't think
Xbox.
they could, like, work around the BIOS? I
I don't
don't
know.
think
I don't
so.
know. I feel like that would probably not work out. I feel like that's probably legally dicey to some degree, but I don't know.
Yeah,
But you know what? We
but
do
a
have some more
remake would be
questions.
great.
We do have some questions about that in the question block I want to jump into in just a second here. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the Flip Screen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of July. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Asobi, Earth Visitor, Snackago, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. Y'all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go and show your support just like they did, get your name read on the air, get the show early, get a bunch of other good perks and goodies, head over to flipscreen.games where you can find our Patreon, you can find our Discord, you can write into the question block just like everybody did in the back half of this show and get your thoughts read on the air. And of course, you show a little support, help the show out. And while we're here, I do want to just give an announcement for some folks, a reminder for others, I'll say, right? Because if you're in the Discord, you should already know about this. If not, then hey, now you get to learn about it. Next week is, of course, episode 100 of both this and our sister show, Nintendo Noise. And to celebrate these illustrious dates, these incredible accomplishments, over 100 episodes of both of these storied podcasts, we are doing something very special. Over on Nintendo Noise, we're going to be doing Flip Screen Games top 100 Nintendo games of all time. And right here on this here podcast, we're going to be doing a couple things. We're going to do a Q&A. So I would love for you guys to write in with your questions, comments, thoughts, memories about the last 100 episodes of this show or anything in the Flip Screen Games community in general. And we're going to be doing a very special game of Jeopardy, where Steve and I are going to go head to head in a competition hosted by one of you, Mr. Zaid Ida, one of our Snackago, one of our Patreon producers. He's going to be here asking us questions that he's went and sourced. We have no idea what these questions are, except that they are all categories related to the history of the show. And we're going to see between the two of us who can remember what the hell we've said on the last 99 episodes of the podcast, because neither of us has a particularly great memory, so I'm excited to see how that turns out. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I mean, we record so many of these every week, and we talk at length about so much stuff. Like it's muddled. I forget even whether it's been on this show or on the podcast or on Nintendo Noise or After Dark or One More Thing. I have no idea where I've said these things or if I've said these things. So I'm excited. Plus, I've never watched an episode of Jeopardy, so I'm interested to see how it will work.
There you go. So you'll get to learn all about that too. And I think the thing I'm excited is we haven't figured out what it's going to be yet, but we're going to add another prize into the rotation, right? Of course, for our predictions every year, we have the storied the Mbesi Trophy, right? For being a great predictor of the world of video games. For this one, I don't know. Let us know what we should make. Should we make a belt? Should we make a badge, perhaps? And I think this one will only put up on, big special episodes, right? Every 100 episodes, every 50 episodes, we'll go back and do another one and we'll see how it goes. But
Yeah.
it'll be a big honor because when you win it, you get to hold on to it for like 2 years. That's pretty good.
Oh, it would be 2 years, wouldn't it?
It should
Yeah.
be a medal. It should be a medal like the Olympics.
And you
I
just
think that's
wear
the
it,
move.
yeah.
It's got to be an Olympic medal because
But it
that's
should be a
why.
new one every time then, like, you get a different
Oh,
design every
I
time.
like that. I like that. You're right. Okay. You know what? We figured it out right here. So if you want to see which one of us can take home the Olympic medal in knowing our own bullshit, make sure you tune in next week.
Yeah.
And it's not too late, I don't think, to submit your questions. So if you want to, head over to the Discord, hit up Snack Go over there, and should give him a DM, and he will. If it's a good question, maybe he'll include it. So speaking of which, let's jump back into the question block here. We got a question from Snack Go, Mr. Zaydita, who wrote in and said, "Can we expect a new trophy for the first ever three-peat champion?" Well, first of all, thank you, Zayd, for patting me on the back for my incredible skills of prediction because your boy is going for the three-peat. Hashtag three-peat, everybody, right? We're here for 2023. We're about to win again because, of course, your boy is about to secure another point as this deal goes through this year, Steve. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? That puts me up 2 points now, I believe. 3 points, maybe.
That's if the deal goes through, we'll have to wait and see. Could be that the FTC decides to carry on, or it
Could
could be
be, could
that
be.
the CMA is just not
Could
happy.
be, could be. We'll see. But here's my
Yeah, we'll have
thing.
to
Here's
see.
my
I
thing,
mean, we'll
Zayd.
know next week for sure. So
Yeah,
the week after, not next week's episode, the week after, because obviously next week's special episode. But the week after, we can check in.
we can check in. But Zayd, we won't have a new trophy because we've got what? 10 more spots on this one. So it'll have to be the 11th winner will get a new trophy. But
Mm.
until then, we're adding to the plaques right here. But your boy's about to take this one home. This next one comes from Andy Rads, who wrote in and said, "When do we expect Call of Duty games to pop up on Game Pass?" So this right ties back to that conversation we had just before the break about like when will we actually start seeing this stuff come along. And Call of Duty, we do actually know already because Tom Warren, again over at The Verge, who we've pulled from a bunch of his coverage of the case thus far, said he said this over on Twitter. If you're wondering when new Call of Duty games arrive on Xbox Game Pass, if the Activision Blizzard deal goes ahead, the CMA previously revealed it's not until 2025. So they have, and this is like a screenshot from that actual case, and it basically just says, on this basis, we would expect that the benefits would start to accrue within a reasonable period, although there would in practice likely be some delay between the completion of the merger and Call of Duty arriving on Game Pass in 2025. So that's from Xbox.
Is it
So
going to
we
be three? Is it going to be 3 days that we see the back catalog though? Like I could see future games that they're contracted in the same way that we didn't get Deathloop
that's
until
that's
a
exactly
year
why.
after,
That's
right?
exactly why. So the reason this is that case is because Sony already has the marketing deal in place that Judge Corley mentioned, where they had multi-year deals with Activision where they were allowed to market Call of Duty and Xbox was not. That deal is of course still in place, but it is only in place until 2025. So that would mean Call of Duty this year and next year would not end up on Game Pass day and date. We would not, have that experience. They would probably come after either a window of exclusivity. But again, if it's only a marketing thing, then it might be a slightly different story. I'm not exactly sure how that would play out. But we do know that with regard to those specific titles, there's already a deal in place till 2025. But in the case of the Bethesda deal, I think the back catalog of Call of Duty games, like your Modern Warfares, maybe Warzone, any of the stuff that, we already have out, I would imagine all that comes within a week of the deal finally closing. So if it does close next week in that original proposed date, it could be as early as the end of the month that we have Call of Duty on Game Pass.
Yeah, I don't know that I would, I don't know that I would care all that much about it, but I would be excited to see some of the other games from Activision
Yeah, I
Blizzard
mean,
come
not
over.
for me as an individual, but I mean, I'll tell you what, I don't hate Nazi zombies in Call of Duty, so maybe, maybe you jump into that or something for some fun. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, not necessarily
I
my
don't
cup
know
of
why
tea.
they've never done, like, a collection, like the Master Chief collection. Why is there not a collection where I can just go, "I wanna play that multiplayer experience from Call of Duty 3 and that one
Because they want
from,
to sell you
Modern
individual
Warfare."
remakes.
Well, once it's on Game Pass, it won't matter, right?
Yeah.
There's so much news even still coming out there. Like was reading through Tom Warren's feed and stuff, and like CNBC is reporting that the Microsoft has offered the CMA a small and discreet divestiture that the company hopes will address the regulator's concerns, uh,
Like, what
which
if we
apparently will be
just
related to
bribe you?
cloud gaming. So they'll just be like, "Well, we're gonna get out of cloud in the UK."
That's so funny. It's like, what if we just don't do this? This is one thing. You're concerned. Okay, we just won't do it. Bye.
Yeah. Well, and then the CMA said that any deal could face new merger investigation if they restructure the deal. That's gonna have to go through the whole process again if they do that small divestiture, and then, like, who knows? There's a whole thing. So it may not happen. We're gonna have to wait and see, but I'm feeling a bit more confident about the fact that I may win some predictions this year, but it's unlikely.
That I think I'm gonna take this one to the bank, but we'll see. We'll see. Because you never know. But I mean, I'm pretty confident. I'm pretty confident it's still gonna go through. I've been confident this whole time, and there's been nothing that's shaken that confidence yet. Right? Like Xbox has at every single wall that they've been presented. They've found a way to climb it.
Mhm.
So let's see. Let's jump into this next one from Navalis, who wrote in and said, "What do you think Sony's response will be to this acquisition? Buying another studio slash publisher, locking down more exclusives, etc." Bonus question: what is the time frame for when Microsoft buys another studio slash publisher?
Oh, okay. I mean, there's a lot there, right? I think Sony's response is going to be a sulky, a sulky statement coming out saying that they still think
Yeah,
it's like bad for the industry, but that this is still great for PlayStation gamers. That Call of Duty is still going to be there for 10 years. That they're still the best place to play. It'll
right.
be all of that bullshit, right? Jim Ryan's standard playbook. I don't know that they bother with another acquisition. I don't think they've got the cash for it, frankly. Unless they're going to buy someone cheap, like, oh, let's go snap up Ubisoft if they're willing to sell for cheap. I don't know who else they go for. Like, I thought Square Enix maybe, but it seems like the new CEO is pretty adamant that he wants to stay independent and wants to kind of press on with that. So I don't know about that. I think their response is gonna be getting out some of these live service games because that's gotta be the response, is finishing some of the games that they've got in the pipeline and getting it out and making those multiplayer experiences that are exclusive to Sony's platform that everyone cares about. You get an experience that's there and on PC that people are really passionate and excited about, and people they get locked in with it.
So I think I could kind of see it going a few different ways. I think to respond to the question like kind of in kind, I think it'll be both, right? Like I think they will continue to try to lock down exclusives in the way that they have. But again, I think Xbox is also doing that now, and I think that that's probably getting a little tougher for them as Xbox is willing to spend money to secure deals like that. But I definitely think they will continue to try to make games like Final Fantasy 16, like Persona 5 Royal and on, like those types of experiences that are not exclusives but are exclusive to the platform. That's been a winning strategy for them, and it clearly is one that Xbox is now looking to emulate. So I think Sony will definitely double down on trying to maintain that momentum. In terms of buying a studio or publisher, I think they will continue to acquire studios. I don't think that the arms race for acquiring talent has stopped, but I think I don't know. I could kind of see it going both ways because there was a really, really heavy rumor that Sony was looking to acquire Square Enix, right? And that there was that when Square sold off all of their, non-Japanese studios to Embracer Group, there was that rumor that they were looking to consolidate and that they were, preparing for a buyout and that there was the conversation that it was Sony, and you heard from multiple trustworthy sources that that was a plan that they had in mind, right? And they have to answer your question of how much cash reserves they have $14.41 billion on hand.
That's
Um,
nothing. That's nothing. Their market cap is only like 100 billion. It's a drop in the ocean. So even if they did a stock transfer, like this was an all cash deal for Activision
right.
Blizzard. So they couldn't even do a deal like that because they don't have that much cash.
No,
But even if they
but
did like a stock transfer, that is more than half of the value of the entirety of Sony, which also includes movie studios, record labels, a consumer electronics group, and a car company.
yeah, but you're comparing it to a deal that they wouldn't make, right? Like they're not going to publish somebody the size of Activision Blizzard
No,
King or with those assets, and Square Enix would not cost that much, right? Like they spent 3.7 billion on Bungie, right? Like Bethesda went for what was it, 8 billion or was it 5 or 6, somewhere in that range. Um, I think the idea that that Square would sell for you know, even close to that amount, I think is probably not likely. I think the idea of them being more in that Bungie to Bethesda range is probably more accurate. And like again, with 14 on hand, I don't know, right? Like, is that a gamble they might be willing to take to be like, let's buy Square Enix for 5 billion, $8 billion or something like that, right? I'm spitballing. And yeah, that eliminates about half their cash reserves or a third of their cash reserves, but you
I don't
acquire
think
Square
they do.
Enix.
I don't necessarily think that they would do a cash deal. I think it's probably gonna be majority stock, which I think is what the Bungie deal was, if I remember correctly. I can't find the information. Um, I don't know, it's tough. I don't necessarily think that they're interested in buying someone at that scale. They seem to buy smaller studios, like they bought Jade Raymond's studio, they bought Nixie's, they bought Blue Point. They're interested in those smaller niche studios that have IP, but also mainly talent. They want to acquire talent. And yes, buying Square Enix would really lock it down and get Final Fantasy, but they have Final Fantasy anyway. They're the home of Final Fantasy.
Yeah,
It
but
never goes to Xbox.
but
I
I
think if
I
anyone's gonna buy it, it's gonna be Xbox that would
I
want
think
them.
that's why you do buy them though. I like that's why you consider it. Is like you make the point of like, well, they have it anyway right now. Right now. They also had Persona. But now Persona 3 remake and Persona 5 Tactica are launching on Game Pass day and date, and they're not going to be exclusive to PlayStation. And how long until, like we saw that Xbox wanted to acquire Square? Like, what happens if Xbox goes and unloads a dump truck of money in front of Square Enix to be like, make Final Fantasy Xbox exclusive now? Like, they could do that. And unless Sony has stake in Square or owns Square, that's a legitimate threat that they could lose that linchpin, that they could have yet another, cap in their feather, that they're the only place where you can play this storied franchise. That, and again, right, like in general, it's a better place if you want to play JRPGs or Japanese games in general. And the more that Xbox erodes at that differentiation, the more that hurts PlayStation. And the idea that they would want to lock down Square when, you think about on last gen, right? Like Final Fantasy VII Remake was a really significant exclusive for them. This year, FF16 is one of the only two exclusives that they are releasing. Like, I don't think what you're saying is crazy, right? Like, I think you're making a lot of good points, but I think they would be very, very upset to lose Square based on the value that they bring to PlayStation. and I could see them wanting to lock them down in an effort to not lose another partner that they rely on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Square Enix's market cap at the moment is $5.6 billion. So
So there you go.
but their EBITDA was, which is the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, which is the figure that they usually use for investment. Their EBITDA was 0.5 billion, so pretty low. But I would imagine it's probably you're looking at a 10x, maybe 12x on that. So they could probably buy Square for like 8 to 10 billion if they wanted to.
And again, say it's 8, you're left with cash. You're left with several billion dollars in cash reserves, and you acquire one of the biggest gaming brands in the world, and you lock down the studio that made one of the game of the years this year that was exclusive to your platform.
I think a better buy for them is FromSoft. I really do.
That would be a good one for sure.
You get them, you like go make Bloodborne 2, and you own the company that makes one of the
Yep.
most beloved franchises in the world,
That'd
and
be a
it's
lot
now
cheaper.
exclusive to your
Be
platform
a
and a
lot
lot
cheaper too.
cheaper.
But I think if they are going to buy a major company, it is Square Enix. And if not, I think they will continue to buy smaller development teams, like you said.
I think it's gonna continue to be smaller. I think they overpaid for Bungie.
I
Um,
agree. I said that at the time. I,
but,
I think they way
like
overpaid for Bungie. I don't think Bungie is that valuable, if I'm honest.
no, they make 1 game.
And they can't survive
That's
without
it.
massive cash injections.
No. And which we found out last week, right? That was the big thing. It was like they had to keep taking money from NetEase. That was the reason that Microsoft didn't buy it. It was like we're really worried that their burn rate is ridiculous,
Yeah.
and they want to keep spending all this money developing
That's the other
things and
thing,
not
though.
actually making
That's
cash.
the other thing, though. I think buying Square Enix now would be a really good way to assuage some of those narrative concerns of like, are you guys over investing in multiplayer and in games as a service and blah? No, no, no. We have a commitment to high quality, story driven single player games, and that's why we wanted to bring Square Enix into the PlayStation family because their legacy of creating high quality single player experiences and worlds that players want to exist in for hundreds of hours is aligned with the vision at PlayStation. You know, like FF16 is a fucking PlayStation ass game, right? Like we talked about that. It is one of the only studios that was out there able to make a third person cinematic action adventure game on the level of quality and commercial success that PlayStation can. It Final Fantasy 16 is like one of the few games in that conversation.
I think Capcom's games are there too.
Sure,
Um, I think the Resident Evil games are way up there, in my opinion.
I agree. But again, that's a
Uh,
short list. It's them, it's Square, and it's what,
I
EA?
think Sega. I think some of the Yakuza games meet that genre, like
Sure.
Judgment and stuff.
But again, that's not many, right? And it's like I wouldn't
And I
argue that.
think Activision could do it if they really wanted to. I really think they've
Sure.
got the talent to do it. They
They
just were
just don't.
never given the opportunity
Yeah.
because Call of Duty was just printing them cash, as we found out last week. It's making 8 billion just on PlayStation.
But like also to point back, like no disrespect to Yakuza, I don't think Yakuza is like the type of game that God of War is, which is like the kind of game that
No.
Final Fantasy is. Like it
But do
is on
those
that
games
level.
make money? Like, is that like I don't think that's the response here, right? The response is shit, we're gonna lose Call of Duty in 10 years. So do we need to make more live service games? I think that's really kind of
That's
where the response is
that's
at.
part of it, but you can't ignore how key prestige single player games are to uh PlayStation's identity and their brand. And like those like they don't sell like Nintendo games or anything like that. Sure, but like they sell a lot. Spider-Man sold a lot. God of War sold a lot.
Well, they
Horizon.
cost a lot to make,
Sure.
200 million.
Sure, but again, that's why people buy a PlayStation and they don't buy an Xbox. It's part of why anyway, right? And I think as much as Xbox has spent now billions of dollars to acquire these studios, they still don't have the same internal studio output that PlayStation does. Not consistently or quality wise. And that is a feather in PlayStation's cap. And being able to add things like, you know, like something like a Final Fantasy into that, I think is significant, you know?
Yeah, I
But
mean,
like
I kind of feel like they're getting it anyway, and they don't have to spend billions because they're just funding these games.
but that's the
Final
fear
Fantasy
though, is
7 ain't
what
gonna go
happens
to Microsoft.
what happens when Microsoft decides to try to get involved in that though and make an acquisition or try to steal the exclusivity away because they seemingly that's what just happened with Sega. And we'll see what happens with Persona 6. Maybe that's different, whatever. But, you know, it's I don't know. It's something else, right? And I mean, like you look at Final Fantasy 16, and I mean, there's been a lot of debate, which I think is kind of like really ignorant, about like how it only sold 3 million copies and the last one sold 5 million. You should recontextualize that for yourself because Final Fantasy 16 having 3 million sales in its first like week or whatever it was, compared to 15, which launched multi-platform
Were they
on
talking about 15 or 7?
with uh with 15. Yeah, its
Okay.
predecessor had 5 million at launch,
'Cause I would
and
imagine 7 Remake sold shitloads because everyone was really excited about it.
it did, but it was more akin to this in its first week, I believe. Um,
Yeah,
it
I
was
mean, plus
closer
it's
to
launching at a time when Tears of the Kingdom is still on everyone's mind. It's
well,
on
and
one
again though, think about
platform.
this. It was 15 was multi-plat, and the PS4 was further in its life cycle. There were more PS4s available. So like this game is actually selling, I think, pretty well for where it is in terms of where it falls on
Yeah, I
the
think
life
it's selling
cycle.
okay, but it's, nothing ever reaches the heights of, say, like a first party Sony game on PlayStation's platforms, unless it's Call of Duty or FIFA. And it's weird. I don't know why.
But I mean, I don't know. Uh,
And nothing
it's tough.
beats like a Tears of the Kingdom. The attachment rate Nintendo manages to get for their games on their consoles is insane. It's
Yeah.
like 50%.
Yeah, it's wild. And I mean, like, there's no PlayStation IP that comes close to that. Even the
No,
biggest one, you know? Even Spider-Man.
no, and like Microsoft's got nothing, nothing in comparison.
No. And that's why
I mean,
you can't really
maybe we'll see a lot of
compare.
people jumping on. I was gonna say
Go
maybe
ahead.
we'll see a lot of people jumping on Starfield. Maybe that is the time because it's a beloved studio and it's from the
Yeah.
makers of Skyrim, and we know them and we're excited about it. And I can go and play it for. I
It
can
has that
buy a Game
opportunity.
Pass for $10 and I can try it.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the one that kinda pushes through in that regard because I think a lot of the other stuff that they have in their portfolio is, like, it's just more niche or it's, like, an IP that's, like, in decline, you know? Like, obviously, Halo was the biggest game in the world, like, 20 years ago, but it's not now. So, like,
Yeah,
they've gotta figure out what comes next, and I think there is a sense of, like, I don't know that just buying up studios that already have IP that's not new and exciting and that like, I don't know. I don't know that that strategy pans out the way they want it to, but it's also, like, I think it speaks to the fact that they're doing a different thing, right? Like, their goal is to make a broader Xbox Game Pass catalog, and PlayStation's goal is to have exclusive content that is like some of the most talked about stuff of the year. And if you want to enjoy it, you got to be on our platform. And it's
it's
just,
gonna be very interesting to see what strategy wins out because I don't think it's gonna be PlayStation's in the long term. I think ultimately we'll see them go down the same route. We saw that anyway with the shift in the rebrand of PlayStation Plus, that they realized that they kind of need a catalog. People are familiar with it with other media. They're used to it with movies. They're used to it with music. Why is it not the same with games? Why have I got to buy each game individually? And people want that. And I think ultimately that's where they're going to need to shift to.
I don't know. I think you're right that there is a level of inevitability to that model and that like PlayStation will have to evolve and have an offering there. But I don't think that they need to directly compete with Game Pass. Like I just don't think that's what this is.
I ultimately think Game Pass, and I think that's the reason why they're buying all of these studios. It dies in the same way that Netflix does, that eventually Ubisoft goes, "Well, we got Ubisoft Plus, so we don't need to give you our games." And
Yeah.
EA Play goes, EA goes, "Well, we got EA Play, so we're not gonna put our stuff on Game Pass anymore," and yeah, Activision could have done the exact same thing. They could have had all of their games on, like, Activision Plus, and you subscribe to that,
Yeah.
but I think that is where it goes. I think every big developer, every studio has their own one of these. Surprised we haven't seen anything from, like, Devolver where I can
That's
subscribe
the
to
thing
it.
though, I don't
Even
I don't
Humble
s
Bundle's got one, you know,
I
you
don't
can
see
get
that.
subscribed to, like, Humble Plus or whatever it's called.
I don't see that as being the future. Because I mean, let me say this. I think you're right that that will happen. I don't see that as ultimately being the future of how games are sold because it didn't really play out that way in the streaming wars either, right? Like there are a lot of streaming services right now. There are several that are making big plays to try and cement themselves as
But
relevant.
there's 2 huge ones, right?
Yeah,
Netflix and
exactly.
Disney Plus.
Right.
And I think Apple's up there. I think Apple's carving out a niche of they've become the HBO of the streaming services. They're like, "We're gonna make quality content, and we're gonna have limited amounts, and we're not gonna spread ourselves too thin."
Right.
Like, that's the kind of thing I think would be perfect. Like, come to
But
Annapurna Plus, gain access to that amazing catalog of all of these quality games because we only make hot shit.
yeah, and I think I could see something like that where there is like, it's like, oh, it's like the Criterion thing, right? Like you can get that, but it's like not everybody has that. A very specific type of person has that, right? There's that horror one that I can't remember the name of, but it's called like Splatter or something like that, and it's all just horror
Oh,
stuff,
that's
right? Like,
fun. I need to find that one for
um,
Halloween.
so I think when it comes to that sort of thing, I think you're probably right that like most people are like, how do we do this? But I think you can look at all the people that did it that didn't work. Like like who's subscribing to EA's service like that? Who's subscribing to Ubisoft's service like that? They're not. They're subscribing to Game Pass and getting access to those games there. Or they're buying
But
the
they're
games.
getting those through EA Play, which you only get as part of Game Pass Ultimate, so I
Right.
presume that there's, like, an exchange of
Yeah,
money
and I'm not
there.
saying that
But I
EA's not
do
making
think over
money
on the
on it, but they're
I think
doing it on
over
the
on the
back of
PC side,
an
though, it's
actually
different.
successful thing, And like, and
Yeah.
again, I think you look at the PC thing. I don't know, dude. Like, do you really think that that makes that much sense? Because I don't. Like, I don't see gamers being like, yeah, let me have enough active subscriptions where I'm spending as much as I could be to buy games a la carte. Because I don't really think gamers want that. Gamers are still resistant to move away from physical media, let alone being like, I don't own a single game and every single thing that I have is just on a subscription service that lives and dies by a company's
I
whim.
don't think
I don't see
PC
that.
gamers care about that, you know, they've not had physical media for so long, they buy things over on Steam. I think the moment Valve is like, "Ah, sod it, we'll give a go at one of these," they get a bunch of people on board, they get a bunch of developers on board, and they sell a
Yeah, but
lot of
how many
subscriptions.
yeah, but how many of those are you gonna have? Like, you're not I don't think
No, but
gamers
then
are gonna
my point
have
is that I
multiple
think
streaming
people
services.
yeah, but I think people move around and cancel and, like, pick different ones. I
Yeah,
think
but that's
ultimately,
my
though,
whole
my
point
point
though.
being
If
was, like, I think that is what motivated Microsoft to make these acquisitions, that
you're
eventually
right.
the content from other studios is not gonna be on their platforms.
But you're right. But you're talking past my whole point with people don't buy movies the way people buy video games. People don't buy music the way people buy video games. And I think that that's
I think
for a
because it's
multitude
so
of
accessible.
reasons. And I think that's for a multitude of reasons, but like I would never ever ever subscribe to an EA subscription service. I would buy
Why?
because I don't play enough of their games.
But
But
if
I
it was, I can subscribe to EA Play and I can play the 2 Star Wars games and Mass Effect, and I can subscribe for 2 months and it'll cost me $10 and I'll
That's not a
cancel it.
good deal. Like that's a worse deal because then I have to beat the game in the amount of time that I would have paid to buy it and own it, which is like for most people, that's not how they play games. And a lot of people do not play that many video games, right? Most people, like the average consumer, watches television every single day. They use Netflix or D Plus or Max or whatever the services they have. They use them multiple times a week, right? Like we've talked all the time about how many gamers are that only play a few games a year. Like
Mhm.
I could see that for Game Pass and being like, oh, I'll subscribe to Game Pass and jump in, jump out of
But
a few
I could
games here
also
or
see
there.
it for their specific game. If their game is a Ubisoft game and they are spending hundreds of hours in say, the latest Assassin's Creed, and they wanna get the benefits of it, and they wanna get, like, every single expansion, they're gonna pay for a subscription for it in the same way that I bet people
That's
would
a
for a
but
Destiny 2 subscription.
no, I don't think so. That's a worse deal because you just said they're spending hundreds of hours. If you're
How is
spending
it any
hundreds of
different
hours
to, say, subscribing to World of Warcraft?
because you have to subscribe to World of Warcraft for access. You don't have to do that for Assassin's Creed. You can buy it for $70 or $60 and you just own it. And if it is a 100-hour game that you take that say you only have enough time to play it for 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week or even 20 hours a week, like you're going to spend more money playing it through the subscription service than you would if you just owned it. And that equation makes sense when you play a ton of fucking video games. But a lot of people don't play a ton of video games. They buy 3 or 4 games a year, or they buy 1 or 2 games a year and they play the shit out of them. That's a
Mhm,
much better deal for that type of consumer. And I think for when you're talking about Xbox or PlayStation or like a large company that owns a ton of IP and owns a ton of games that they can leverage in a library like that, that's a much better argument for them, right? To be like, yeah, I'll buy Game Pass for $11 a month and have access to hundreds of games, right? Versus, okay, so like with EA, so I'm gonna subscribe to EA Play so that I can play Star Wars Jedi because that's the one game they're putting out this year I want to play. But then Tears of the Kingdom comes out. So when I cancel my subscription and then I come back to it, and then I've spent, what, half the cost of the game to maybe not even get 10% into it. Like that doesn't make sense. That's a bad deal. And the whole reason that these other streaming, like in other mediums, the reason that they work is because people are trained to not pay for those things anymore, right? Like music is a commodity. You're given music for free and you pay for convenience of access, right? You rent music, you don't buy music. You rent movies, you don't buy movies.
and
People
I
don't
genuinely
really rent
think,
games like
though,
that.
that's where people are playing. Yeah, they do. Like, the number 1 games on every platform are, like, free-to-play games.
That's not
Peop
renting. It's free. That's why they're playing it. It's because it's free and they
Yeah,
don't have to pay for it, though.
it's
So what you're
it
saying is that people are going to do that and spend a shitload of money? They're going to spend hundreds of dollars a year
people
on a
do that.
subscription service? I
People
don't think
spend
they will.
hundreds of dollars in fucking Fortnite coin, whatever they're called,
That's different.
Fortnite bucks.
That's
But
different.
it's not,
It
because they're
is.
already basically paying for a subscription with the battle passes. If you're telling me if Epic Games did like an Epic Games subscription and I get a battle pass for every single one of their games over the course of the year, that people wouldn't subscribe to it? Yeah, they would.
I don't think that's the
100%.
same thing, though. You just are talking about a different product. Now you're talking about a battle pass. That's not the same thing. That's selling a thing to an already deeply entrenched, activated audience, and you also don't have to buy those. Like that game, excuse me, that game's existence is subsidized by
Mhm.
the people that do spend money so that, the fucking literally millions and millions of children that play that game and never spend a cent because they're broke, they don't do that. And I don't think they would because they don't have money. And the reason that free to play games are enormous is because they're free. And paying for a subscription service is not the same as something being free. And I don't think that that means that subscription in gaming is not a viable model, but I don't see a future where I have as many gaming subscription services as I do television subscription services.
How many
I just
television
don't.
subscription services have you got? If it's
If you
3, I 100% think there will be a future where you have
Let me think.
3 gaming subscription services.
Okay, so that I
'Cause
pay for
you've already got 2. You've already got Game Pass and Switch Online, and I
Switch on.
presume PlayStation Plus, that's also another subscription service.
Those are that's sure, but that's different because that's connected to a platform and you're paying for that. PlayStation, fair play. Nintendo, that's not really what it is, right? Like, yes, you get that, but you're also doing that to pay for online access. As long as those are a combined feature, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I
Mhm.
understand why someone buys Nintendos. I understand why someone buys PlayStations or Xboxes. I don't understand why someone would buy Ubisofts
I
unless
don't
they're playing
either
every Ubisoft
necessarily.
game that comes out. But who
I
is that person?
There are those people. I don't know why, because every single game's the
Well,
same
who
with a
are they?
different
How
skin.
many of them are there? Are there enough to support that and one for
Maybe not.
EA and one for
I
X,
don't
X, X, X,
necessarily
X,
think
X?
there is,
And then what does
but
that mean for like developers or smaller companies that are not associated with these? I just think games are so fractured that like I think purchasing video games will always be a primary part of how they're bought and sold. Buying individual copies of games. I really believe that. And I think that you're totally right that like subscription services will emerge and continue to grow and become a bigger segment, but I don't see a future where like you really think that there's a future where you will have three, four, five subscriptions where you're spending $15 a month from multiple publishers. I don't see you doing that. Who are they? What companies do you
I'm
play
not
that
saying I
many of
will.
their games?
I'm not saying I will, but
You said you thought you
saying
could
that
see me doing it though.
yeah, you're already paying for 3. That's my point. You
I'm
said
not
I
though. I'm
can't
not.
see a time where
I turned Game Pass off right now because I'm playing on PlayStation. I don't have anything there. I have the base level of PlayStations, but that's for online, not for that inherently, and for PS Plus, right? So that's a whole other thing. It's like 3 services that are bundled
Mhm.
together that I'm paying for, and it's not monthly. It's an annual subscription that costs less than the cost of a game. And then on
Yeah, well, I mean,
Nintendo
Game Pass
Switch,
is the price of a single game over the course of a year.
right? But again, it has so many
Yeah,
titles on
but
it.
my
The
point was, and
EA
we've got so
service,
far away from my point. My point was, it's inevitable. These services are already happening. They already exist. Ubisoft Plus already exists. EA Play already exists. At some point, those games will be removed from Game Pass, and that's why Microsoft are buying these companies, because they
yeah,
see a future where it becomes Netflix, where all of the Disney content's gone, and where do I have to go watch that? I've got to go watch it on Disney Plus. All of the Paramount content's gone. Is anyone subscribing to Paramount Plus? No, but I can't watch it on Netflix anymore. And that's what's gonna happen with the games.
yeah,
That's what's gonna happen over at PlayStation as well. I don't think you're not gonna subscribe to PlayStation Plus and be able to play the latest Assassin's Creed. You're gonna have to get Ubisoft Plus if you want that, or just buy the game.
yeah,
That
yeah.
was my point, was that these services are inevitable. They're already going to happen. They're already happening. It is going to be the future where if you want to play Microsoft's games, you can subscribe to Game Pass. I don't necessarily think there's going to be many other games other than Microsoft's games on there. It'll only be the ones that don't have their own streaming services at the moment. And that's what Sega's their biggest third party publisher.
Yeah, that's probably right. But I think that that still makes a lot of sense though when you factor in all the indies, all the independent, like double and triple A studios that have content that they need to get out and that they don't have a publisher that has a service or something like that. Like I think you'll continue to see those things, but I think you're probably right that eventually those services move away. But I think the alternative is maybe they don't because they're not successful enough in their own right. And the only way they make money is a part of
Yeah, I mean,
Xbox or
Ubisoft's not
PlayStation's.
very successful in their own right at the moment.
No.
I can see them disappearing. That's one of your predictions, that they go bust, right? Or they get bought.
Yeah.
So, you obviously don't have much faith in Eves.
Not long term anyway, but I don't know. Then like they announced a couple
Then they
things that
announced a really hot new Star Wars game that you're
and
really
that Prince
excited
of
about.
Persia game looks good. So it's like,
Yeah?
maybe they're gonna pull it back. We'll see.
You're like,
But
"Maybe I'll subscribe to Ubisoft Plus next year and I get Far Cry 7 again."
but anyway, to put a pin in this part of the conversation because we're on a rabbit hole here, but interesting conversation I think. Um, I think you're definitely right. I guess my point is, I guess what I've been saying this whole generation, which is that I don't think that any of the big 3 currently have a strategy to me that feels like the only path forward. I think what Xbox is doing makes a lot of sense for Xbox. I don't think that that means PlayStation will eventually have to chase that. That might be wrong
There's part
10.
of their strategy that they are having to chase, though, which is the multi-platform strategy. They know that live service games will just die on their platform, and
Sure.
so they're bringing them to PC and they're bringing them to Xbox. That's why they bought Bungie. Marathon's not exclusive. It's
Yeah.
coming everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing though, right? Is like that to me feels like a different play than how they sell the box, which is the single player first party stuff. And like that makes sense to me, right? In the same way that it makes sense that like Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo want to get into the mobile space and like the decisions they make there are going to be different than the decisions they make to sell the box, right? Like I think at the end of the day, the PlayStation brand is exceptionally strong. PlayStation's outsell Xboxes like 2 to 1. And I don't see that changing. I don't think that we're anywhere near a future where we don't have a dedicated box in our living room that plays games. And I think PlayStation has the leg up there. And I think Xbox has a long way to go to close that gap. Can they close that gap? Sure. The Xbox
Yeah, in 10
360,
years' time when Call of Duty is exclusive on Xbox.
maybe so. Maybe so. But again, it speaks to that other whole thing where it's like, and I'd like to pull in this question from Left Eye Lazy here from the Discord because I think it drives to this question pretty well. In future generations, do we ever see an Xbox with this compatibility again? They've admitted to losing the console wars and want to focus on cloud gaming. Will there be an Xbox as we know it ever again, or will the name strictly be tied to Game Pass? I think that's a really interesting question. And I don't necessarily think that Xbox gets out of the hardware game soon, but like they might eventually. And
Oh,
if they
yes, yeah,
do,
see, so I think I interpret the question as, are we just gonna get digital-only versions like the Series S? And I actually think both big platform holders are gonna go digital-only on the
yeah,
next generation.
I think that's probably
Uh,
true. But
I
I think there's
The
multiple
PlayStation
questions here.
5 Slim is rumored not to have a disk drive, and you have to buy that
Right.
optionally. They're already going one step in that direction. PlayStation has been way more aggressive in trying to push people to their own marketplace. They've got a digital-only version, and you can't buy codes from any other online retailer. You have to buy digital copies from PlayStation, whereas Xbox, I can go buy a code on Amazon if I want to, and I can probably get it for a cheaper price than I could on the
You
Xbox
can do that
store.
with Nintendo too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right. I wouldn't be surprised if it's next generation, but I could see it being maybe 2 generations from now. I guess it depends because like consoles, we're in an interesting spot because the whole thing was always like you can't get rid of physical because consoles depend on brick and mortar stores for distribution. And that's
Not
like
anymore.
increasingly not the case,
I can go
right?
to PlayStation Direct and buy it from them if I want
Right.
to.
Right. But it's also like how many people still do that, right? Like again, you talk about the casual player, like my like super anecdotal, right? But like my bandmate, one of my bandmates is an extremely casual player, right? Has my launch PS4 that he plays on and plays 1 or 2 games a year, right? Like that type of person, or like my friend who's a dad and he plays games and he's playing Persona 5 Royal for the fifth time. He's playing Demon Souls again, right? Like he has a PS5. He didn't go and buy that from PlayStation Direct. He didn't go buy that on Amazon. He went to Best Buy and bought that, right? Like he went to Target, right? Like that's where that person goes and buys electronics. And I don't know that we're
You
there
think
yet.
so? I think the majority of people buy electronics on Amazon these days. They're the world's biggest retailer.
And you're totally right about that, but there are people that don't want to make big purchases like that on Amazon because it's like, what? Then I got to wait for them to deliver it. If it gets lost in the mail, what am I going to do if somebody steals the package? Like,
Yeah, see, I find that so strange, right? That's a real tangent. I find it so fucking weird that in America, it's totally acceptable for them just to leave a parcel on your doorstep or your porch.
I mean,
That is not okay in the UK.
for
They
what it's
they
worth, you
they
have to
will take it
consent to it.
away.
You have to consent to it, and even if you say no, they'll do it anyway. So it's great.
That's just dumb. Like, why
It's
is
so
that the
ridiculous.
case?
I really wonder how much Amazon spends on just sending people packages back because it's got to be an insane amount. Like sending
Yeah.
replacements for stuff, it's got to be insane,
I bet they don't care. That's like, oh wow, I guess our corporation tax bill this year got a little bit less.
right? So last question I'm going to ask today is going to come from Asobi. Asobi wrote in with his patented 3 question. But here's the thing: he wrote in with 3 questions and then added a bonus, so it's a 4 question formula. You're cheating today, Asobi. But here's how I'm going to remedy it: because the other 3 questions are all about Final Fantasy 16. I'm going to save that, and hopefully we'll get back to it next week. I've wanted to talk about that game the last 2 weeks since Ken and I reviewed it, and it's been all Xbox news, baby. So we'll save that for next week, and I'm going to answer your one question about Xbox to close out the day. How's that sound, Steve?
Sounds good.
All right. So Asobi wrote in just like you can and said, do you think that Microsoft will slow down with acquisitions for now, not to risk further lawsuits for future acquisitions down the line? Yes and no. I think they will definitely slow down in terms of I don't think they will try another major acquisition like this for probably a very long time. But I would not be surprised if they continued to buy smaller studios like they did kind of in that early period where they were buying like Double Fine and I want to say I'm wanting to
Gideon.
say Bethesda, but yeah, Obsidian. Thank you. I'm like right there, Fallout New Vegas. Teams like that, I could see them acquiring, or maybe you do see them try to spin up more internal studios like they did with the Initiative. But I think with you when you look at like what they've kind of done now, or like they have all of these studios that they've acquired, and during this acquisition, it's become very obvious that there are some real flaws in their studio management process and that there needs to be more oversight. There needs to be more, I guess, middle management between Xbox leadership and then the arms of studios, and that they need to kind of rein things in and figure out like what is their portfolio? What are the teams working on? What is the status of these games? What games are in trouble? What games need more time? What games need more resources? Like we saw that their very quote unquote hands off approach that they put with Redfall and with the initiative's work on Perfect Dark, that it's not working that well. And that like it's taking studios longer than they should to get projects off the ground, or that projects are coming together underbaked or underdeveloped. And I think that with all of these studios that they own now, they need to like pump the brakes and start figuring out how to manage the insane number of teams and IP that they have now, especially after this acquisition. Now that they've ballooned up to like what, like 40 or plus studios at this point, you know?
Yeah, it's a ridiculous amount of
It's nuts.
acquisitions. I'm gonna presume by Microsoft, we're just saying Xbox because Microsoft continue to
Sure.
buy lots of companies. I've had a look at their merger and acquisitions list. They've actually bought another game studio this year. On April 5th, they bought a company called Nemesis Games, who works exclusively with ZeniMax Online. So I think they're going to continue to keep buying companies that we've probably never heard of, as well as some of the smaller companies. But I think this is the last huge company they can buy. They couldn't go out tomorrow and be like, "We're going to get EA next," because
Yeah.
that'll be a big no.
Or like even any of the other ones that we like got, rumors about like Sega or Square. Like I think anything like that, any like billion-dollar acquisition like that is gonna just be under so much scrutiny that they A don't want that, and B, I think if they were to bring another big studio in, it would just create even more chaos in what is clearly already a pretty chaotic situation.
Yeah, I mean, Phil's spoken about that, right? That he wants to have more oversight on things because he wasn't happy with how Redfall came out, for example. But you look at the merger and acquisitions list that I guess didn't really leak, but came out last week. There's some smaller people on there. Supergiant Games, Thunderful,
Yeah.
Niantic, Playrix. Those are smaller companies. Even IO Interactive is a smaller company. They're just one studio. It's not a publisher. Don't think we see any more publishers, but I could see some studios like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think the idea of them acquiring a studio like IO, especially would make a lot of sense considering they have an exclusive game in development with them. They brought all the Hitman stuff to Game Pass. Like, if there is a studio like that they already have a positive relationship, like I think here's what I think is a very likely scenario. Say IO and Xbox continue a positive relationship over the next couple years, and then IO finds themselves in a place where they're struggling for money and they're like worried about the future of the organization or to keep projects afloat. I could see Xbox making an offer to acquire them at that point and that working out, right? I could see them jumping in and buying a studio like, you know, Super Giant or something like that and trying to, lock down the whatever the next big thing from them is as an Xbox IP, right? That
Mhm.
type of thing makes a lot of sense to me because they could get away with it, right? Like that would not be a thing that would need any kind of, court case approval type situation. And I think they're absolutely going to want to stay away from anything like that for at least the next couple of years. Not only just to avoid like more scrutiny, but I think also to avoid stepping on more rakes like they did with Redfall. They don't want to be They don't want their image to be that they're just buying all these companies and mismanaging them, right? Like,
Why don't they
I
just buy Sony? They can afford it, it's nothing.
I think the only way that'll happen is if Sony starts going out of business and then they buy 49% of them. That worked out for them last time, right?
Yeah, I think they could do well. They could do a good job with that. I think they'd be there was no way, absolutely no way. They'd be like, "Yeah, you can buy all of Sony, but PlayStation needs to be divested in order to get that through."
Yeah. Well,
Enjoy
you know.
enjoy making, Walkmans.
Yeah. And electric cars, right? That's what they need help
Yeah.
with. So, I will have an update on this next week. I think one way or the other. I hopefully this will be the last episode for a while where it monopolizes the entire conversation. But yeah, I mean, I hope you guys have enjoyed the coverage as much as we have. Because I find this type of thing to be extremely interesting, right? Like all the documents and everything that have come out have certainly been illuminating. I think I'm excited to get to the point where we can start seeing the ramifications of this already because we've been talking about it for so long. And I think at this point, it's like, let's see what this actually means. Like, let's see how it impacts the studios that exist at Activision Blizzard. Let's see how it impacts the culture there. Let's see what it means for Game Pass and how it shapes up for the back half of this console generation for Xbox because it feels like this whole generation has been just setting up dominoes and we're like waiting for it to all come together and it just
We got 5 more years of it apparently, Pete. So we got 5 solid years where we're gonna see the fruits of all of these acquisitions, I think.
yeah, and I it'll be interesting to see how many of them really come out this generation or is it like that long game and it's not really until next generation. But we'll see. Maybe this is the year, right? Where they get this acquisition through, Starfield comes out and it hits and it's
We're
off to the
seeing some
races.
already though, right? Hellblade's coming out next year. Playground
Yep.
Games, who they bought a couple of years ago, they're working on Fable. So we are starting to see some of the stuff from the
Sure.
acquired
Avowed,
studios
right?
coming out.
Supposed to be coming out next year. That
Yeah,
that looks
Avowed.
great. We've already gotten a couple little wins right here and there with stuff like
But yeah, there's
Pentiment.
nothing major. It's nothing like, holy shit, this is the reason to buy an Xbox. I think that's
Yeah.
the game everyone's waiting for because there's a lot of those over on PlayStation. But I still feel like I'm waiting for it on Xbox. I mean, sure, if you're a Forza fan or a Flight Sim fan, those games are there,
It's
but it's not
it's
the
no
real driving
disrespect.
force.
Yeah, it's no disrespect to those games. They're just not like they're niche, right? Like they're not God of War. They're not Tears of the Kingdom. They're not
The
that.
Last of Us, we just had a massive hit TV show, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and Starfield feels like their first real shot at that. So we'll see what
Mm.
happens. We'll see what happens. So make sure that you guys keep it tuned here and write in with your thoughts on what we discussed here on this week's episode. What are the games that you're excited to see come to Game Pass? What are the IP that you hope Phil and the team are looking to bring back? I would love to see us finally start to get some of the conversation of like the goofy speculative stuff. Like we're like, what if we get Toys for Bob to make like a banjo game? Like I would love to see us enter that era where it's like we have all these studios and all these IP. Like, who wants to play with what? And let's figure it out because I think that would be cool. When you get down to media consolidation, like that's the one thing that is interesting is like, wow, so we live in a world where we could get a new Vegas too. Where's that? Right? Give us some of those kind of announcements. That would be really neat. That's what I'd like to see. But if you've got your own ideas, make sure you write into us questions at flipscreen.games. Come join the Discord and keep the conversation rolling between episodes. However you choose to get involved, flipscreen.games is the website where you can go and click on some stuff and it helps us out a lot and it doesn't cost you a pretty penny. Unless you want to go spend some money, then get over to Patreon and show us your support over there. We greatly appreciate it. But hey, you know what? Bunch of ways to get involved, even if you don't have any money to toss our way. So, however you choose to get involved, however you choose to interact with the community, we thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Flip Screen Games podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.